It's 1492. The Taino Indians live peacefully in their villages that spread over Cuba, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, now known as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They live in villages led by a cacique or chief. Their entire lives are reliant on their small, communal farms, the ocean that surrounds them, and whatever edible materials they can find in their surroundings. The men fish using flint-tipped wooden spears and hunt with bows and arrows. Their main trade is based upon the water.
To them, water was not a barrier in any way, shape, or form. Water was not a barrier. It was their expressway. They were excellent navigators. They could get in their canoes and knew exactly where to go and how to get there, and got there fast and easy.
In Spain, the conquest of Granada is coming to a close. Granada has rebelled against King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel's actions. On January 2nd, 1492, the 8-month siege the Christians placed on the city of Granada came to a close. Now, with victory on their minds, the King and Queen of Spain give a young explorer, Christopher Columbus, a blessing, and 3 ships to find a trading passage to India. They traveled on the Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina. Columbus first stopped in the Canary Islands before arriving in the West Indies. In October of 1492, they hit land. Rather than in India, they had in fact arrived in Hispaniola. The ship that Columbus was sailing on, the Santa Maria, struck a jagged outcropping close to shore, leaving the crew to swim desperately for the shores of Hispaniola. When they arrived, they were greeted warmly by the Taino people. After the Spanish had gotten back on their feet, they built a small fort at La Navidad, near their landing point. Then, Columbus sailed back to Spain with the native slaves on his ship to update King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel on the results of the voyage, and to ask for another grant to continue his conquest. Columbus is given a hero's welcome in Spain. He had found a new continent. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel grant Columbus 17 ships on which to make his next voyage to the New World. The main goal of their first voyage was to obtain gold and find a safe passage to India. They also hoped to convert more people to Christianity. As soon as the Spaniards arrived, they realized that the climate and resources in the West Indies was very different from that in Spain. Therefore, Columbus and his men had to keep good relations with the Taino. This relationship proved to be more important when the Spaniards discovered gold among the land. When Columbus leaves for Spain, nobody is left in charge. The colonists began to become restless and start looking for gold more and more. After a while, they began enslaving Taino and forcing them to search for gold.
Capitán, ¿qué es esto?
Mana, entendí, Necho.
¿Te crees que soy tonto? ¿Me quieres engañar o qué? Aquí no hay más que arena.
No caigo, mana, entendí, cucho.
¡Que me hables en cristiano, que no te entiendo!
Caipi más cancho ni matapis.
¡Eso es arena!
No caigo, más caigo.
¡O dale!
Due to their nature-based polytheistic religion, the natives were extremely offended of the abuse to their people and their sacred lands. This conflict caused skirmishes between the natives and the conquistadors whenever the Spanish would search for gold on indigenous lands. Many colonists also died in the fort of La Navidad because they did not know how to eat the food of the Taino, such as parrots, iguanas, and cassava. The result of all of this is that when Columbus returned to Hispaniola, armed with 17 ships and hundreds of colonists, he finds the fort that he left at La Navidad empty. All of the 39 men he had left in Hispaniola were dead. This enraged the Spaniards. They considered themselves rightfully superior to the indigenous Taino people.
The Spaniards didn't think that they were doing anything bad to the Taino. There were victors, and there were the conquered, right? And Europe is full of battles. European peoples, were all the time fighting, and to the victors go the spoils, right? So they were taking the Tainos in as workers, as laborers. They were taking their things. What did that matter? The Tainos were the conquered, and they were the victors.
No matter what, they would have been conquered that their initial generosity, I don't even think included gold to begin with. I think that by welcoming the Spanish, they might have actually just prevented war from breaking out right away.
Over time, this relationship became strained due to anger stirring among the Spaniards and greed for gold and other sources of wealth. This got to the point that the Spaniards were blatantly pillaging villages, raping Taino women, and searching rapidly for gold. Naturally, the Taino fought back. One chief in particular, Guaragana, was especially enraged by the Spanish conquistadors' actions and burned a house of 46 Spaniards and killed 10 others. Over the years, the Taino population in Hispaniola was reduced to nearly nothing. Hearing of what was going on, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel of Spain tried to reform the colony by sending a few more leaders to Hispaniola. However, each new ruler failed, and the situation became worse and worse for the natives. One leader, Governor Orvando, even killed 600 natives in one village and burned a building of 80 Taino caciques, or chiefs. Those who were enslaved often died of exhaustion in gold mines and cotton fields. Many Taino also died from diseases like smallpox, which were brought over from Europe, as they had not developed immunities to them yet. The Taino who escaped death were forced into brutal slavery, and every Taino Indian over the age of 14 had to provide the Spanish with the equivalent of a hawk's bell, about the size of a jingle bell, full of gold, every 3 months or so. If they missed their deadline, their hands would be cut off. By the time 1496 rolled around, the initial Taino population that existed before the Spanish had arrived in Hispaniola had been reduced by 2/3. By the end of the first decade of the 1500s, nearly all of the Taino in Hispaniola were dead. During this mass genocide, however, there was one chief who, seeing that he would never be able to escape the Spaniards on his home island, really knew what he had to do to save his village and to save his people. This cacique went by the name of Hatue, and the people in his village and many people from the villages surrounding his traveled on piraguas, which are immense canoes made of hollowed-out trunks of trees, to Cuba, where other Taino indigenous people resided. Interestingly enough, some of Hatue's followers were actually African slaves, due to the fact that inland Hispaniola was covered in expansive rainforests and vast mountain ranges. The slaves found it easy to hide once they escaped their masters, and often joined the ranks of the Taino, working with them to fight back against the Spanish conquistadors. When Hatue finally arrived in Cuba, he knew that the Spanish wouldn't be too far behind. Thus, while his initial goal in going to Cuba was to save his village from immediate slaughter, he saw his insight as an opportunity to heighten Cuban Taino preparation. Hatue gathered many of the people on the island from various villages, and holding up a basket of precious stones, told them to throw them in the rivers. After this, Hatue began to prepare for the Spanish arrival. He gathered a fighting force of just over 1,000 natives and hid in the mountains waiting for the Spanish to arrive. In the final months of 1511, Spanish boots hit Cuba's beaches, and the conquistadors, under the leadership of Diego Velasquez, established a fort at Baracoa, on the far eastern end of the island. Every once in a while, whilst the Spanish were out gathering supplies, Hatue and his fighting force would attack the conquistadors, and then retreat back into the mountains, where it was difficult for the Spanish to navigate with their non-existent knowledge of the environment. Finally, after keeping the Spanish in their fort for 3 months, Hatue and many of his followers were captured. Because of their treacherous stand against the conquistadors, some were doomed to death by fire on a stake, while others were made slaves. On February 2nd, 1512, Hatue and a few of his followers were tied to the stake, ready to be burned. He did not flee from the face of danger. He took a stand for his culture and his people. Despite Hatue's death in 1512, his contribution to the West Indies would live on for centuries to come. Throughout Cuban history, as a result of his rebellious spirit and love for his people, Hatue was praised as a martyr, and referred to in rebellions, including the time when Fidel Castro finally led the Cubans to independence from Spain, and was an inspiration for revolutions throughout the Western Hemisphere. Furthermore, he became a symbol that many descendants of the Taino tribe can be proud of. Despite the extreme power of the Spanish, many of the Taino people, including Hatue, established a valiant revolt in the name of their religion, their culture, and their tribe.